So, I have put an obscene amount of time into 3 houses. I've even completed the 4 routes twice, because, oh what the hell, there's pretty much a desert of AAA releases coming up on the Switch right now.
Oh wow, here's a game that looks interesting. I am dead. A bit like the Nintendo Switch lineup at this point.
If you mention 3 houses, one of the things that comes to people's minds pretty quickly is the branching narrative. I can truthfully say that the time skip and the resulting branch in the story is one of 3 houses' greatest assets. The game really lends itself to being played multiple times because of it. But which story path is the best of them all? Let's find out. And just 2 warnings before we go on. First off, spoilers. There will be lots of them. And second, this is obviously just my opinion, so don't get your knickers in a knot if I put your favourite route last. Obviously you're allowed to have your opinion too, and that's awesome. With all that said, of course...
Number 5.
Oh god, I've done it now, haven't I? I mean, how dare I criticise everyone's precious golden boy Claude? But before you smash that dislike button, at least hear me out. This isn't a riff on Claude. In fact, I like Claude. I just wish his story was actually, well, about him. Bear with me and just picture this for a second. Is it possible to take Dimitri out of Azure Moon and have it still make sense? No, it's not, because Azure Moon is all about Dimitri. It's about him letting go of his need for revenge, learning to live for the present, and forgiving himself. Is it possible to take Edelgard out of Crimson Flower? No, because it's about Edelgard seeing her dream of uniting Fodlan and eliminating the Crest to its end. But what happens if you try to take Claude out of Verdant Wind? Well, that's easy. You get Silver Snow. The fact that Silver Snow actually exists in the game pretty much invalidates Claude in his own story, because it proves that it can work without him. Now I can still see some of you getting up in arms, but surely Silver Snow is a copy of Verdant Wind, not the other way around. Well, what you might find very interesting to read is this translated Nintendo Dream interview with the developers of 3 houses. In it, they state that the Silver Snow route was actually the first to be created, meaning of course that Verdant Wind is actually just the church route, but with Claude and Elmira shoehorned in there somewhere. And you know, some of this is painfully obvious. For example, small stuff like Sedith coming up with the idea to disguise your troops in the Fort Mercius mission, even though that was supposed to be Claude's idea in his own path. You have the fact that Claude is nowhere to be seen during 2 key cutscenes, the destruction of Fort Mercius and Edelgard's death, the latter of which portrays Edelgard as really clingy outside of Silver Snow. In Silver Snow you actually led Edelgard for a year, so it makes sense, but here the drama just falls so flat on its face.
My teacher, claim your victory. Strike me down, you must.
I don't even know who you are.
On top of that is the nail in the coffin, which is that all the maps in Verdant Wind are the same as Silver Snow. And it's a shame because Claude's path just reeks of missed potential. Don't you wish that Verdant Wind could have dealt with issues actually pertinent to Claude, like his past, his parentage, how his allegiance is torn between Elmira and the Alliance, etc., rather than just mention them offhand? Out of all the paths in the story, Verdant Wind is the only one that I genuinely think needed to be rewritten from the ground up. It doesn't help that bringing in Nemesis as the final boss is just an odd writing decision. They never give a clear explanation for why or how the guy is brought back from the dead, so it just feels like a bad attempt to cram in all this background lore that they couldn't fit organically into the story. I know the ending gets to explore a number of crucial story elements, like the truth about the crests and the birth of Byleth. I just wish it didn't feel so out of left field. All the other routes have an ending that's personal in some way, but what personal relationship does Claude have to Nemesis? Why does this battle matter to him? A battle like this should feel epic, but the way it's written, it just feels so forced. So it's actually with regret that I put Claude's route last, because I really wish he'd gotten a bit more love from the developers. I wish they'd realised his potential rather than just giving him a copy and paste job of the Silver Snow route with a tacked on ending.
Number 4.
So I understand that most people consider Silver Snow a poor man's Verdant Wind, but honestly it's actually slightly better. Ultimately, Silver Snow is connected by a much clearer vision. It tells a mostly coherent story about the tragic conflict between you and your former student. So there's a decent emotional element in there, at least until chapter 19, because after you kill Edelgard, there's unfortunately no emotional urgency to anything that follows. This is maybe the biggest problem with Silver Snow. The ending is just so messy. Edelgard should have been the final boss of this route. The whole story was about the tragedy of killing your former student. So the problem is that killing Edelgard completely deflates the tension in the story, and as a result, there's basically no strong antagonist in the last 2 chapters. What we get instead is easily the worst ending of the game, with Rhea and her disciples turning berserk due to some blood-sharing ritual we find out at the last minute. I remember when I started this battle for the first time, I kind of just sat there, open-mouthed, not believing what I was seeing. It just smacks of lazy, pointless writing, a poor excuse for a final boss. I get that some people like the final boss for having this sad, emotional element, but killing Rhea has to come out of the story organically, not just because the writers wrote it that way. I mean, why does Rhea turn crazy in Silver Snow, but not Verdant Wind? Wasn't she under the same circumstances? And why does Nemesis resurrect in Verdant Wind, but not Silver Snow? Basically, changing up the final bosses without reason opens up this really terrible can of worms. Silver Snow has another problem. It focuses on Byleth, the Avatar. And this is a problem because Byleth isn't really a character. He's a self-insert. So a story that revolves around him is bound to just be really boring. When you step back and look at it among the rest, Silver Snow is probably the most superfluous route of them all. If you took it away from the game and had Crimson Flower as the only Black Eagle's path, you'd still have a pretty complete game. So to a lot of people, Silver Snow just exists to give players a chance to leave Edelgard if they don't agree with her, rather than existing out of its own merits. And to be honest, I can really see that.
Number 3.
Crimson Flower is easily the most underrated, overhated route in the game. A lot of people vilify this route for being unfinished, and some people go as far as saying it's the worst route in the game. But it's my job today to try and convince you that all of these issues are actually blown way out of proportion. One thing that no one can dispute is that Crimson Flower is unique. Whereas Verdant Wind and Silver Snow are nearly the same to a T, and Azure Moon goes off of that but changes a number of chapters to fit its story, Crimson Flower is its own thing. From a gameplay perspective, we get 3 exclusive units, Edelgard, Hubert and Euritza, and get to play on vastly different missions. These chapters truly felt unique, and the last 2 maps, the Tailtean Plains and the fight for Ferdiad, were incredibly dramatic and atmospheric. Speaking of, this is another thing that Crimson Flower does right, which is it provides a great counterpoint to the other routes. The other 3 routes have you fight for the Church, while Crimson Flower is the only one to have you fight against Rhea. And because you were a member of Church yourself for a year, turning your back on Rhea easily gives the game the richest drama. And this really lets the voice actors shine.
I trusted you. Lady Rhea trusted you. I won't let you live after what you've done.
You. How dare you betray me? You worthless piece of garbage. I will punish you myself.
So while people might feel this makes Crimson Flower worse because Byleth's and Edelgard's actions are morally objectionable, to me it made it all the more effective. After all, conflict should be the driving force of the story, and Crimson Flower definitely understands this. That said, there is a lack of polish in some areas of Crimson Flower, and that's easy to see with the cutscenes, or relative absence of them. We only get one cutscene to end the game, but there easily could have been a cutscene for the reunion or Dimitri's death. The length of this route also gets a lot of flack, but I'll be honest, it doesn't bother me. It stops the route from running out of momentum, and it even makes a point about the power of the Empire. The real issue is that they didn't find a way to deal with those who slither in the dark in the main game. Part of Edelgard's story is about breaking free from their control. Not getting to see this part of the story is pretty egregious, honestly. It wouldn't have been difficult to insert 1 or 2 chapters right after Fort Merceus blows up, and these could have dealt with Shambhala, just to give the story some closure.
Number 2.
So I don't know what you guys were expecting when I started this list off with number 5 instead of number 4. But make no mistake, White Clouds is as much as a part of the story as the others, and deserves to be ranked among them. White Clouds is a great introduction to the world of the game, and exposits information at just the right pace with its missions. It teaches you about the Officers' Academy and the crests and the relics, whilst always hinting of something shady going on behind the church. And I think this is a great strength of White Clouds. It has great pacing, whereas Part 2 on most routes can feel like a drag sometimes. White Clouds also makes the greatest use of the monastery to convey its story. In Part 2 you feel like if you never went to the monastery, you wouldn't miss out on anything. But do that in Part 1 and you'll probably miss out on a lot. Story sequences like the ball, and Flame's kidnapping, and in particular Gerald's death, are all conveyed really well by the monastery. The only thing I'd level against White Clouds is that it gets a bit tiring on subsequent runs of the game. But apart from that little quibble, White Clouds is definitely a great introduction to the game.
Number 1.
Kill every last one of them!
Azure Moon comes first because it tells a real compelling story, a narrative that is actually about something. It's the story of letting go of revenge and forgiving yourself, learning to fight for the living rather than the dead. The story is rife with compelling conflicts, both internal and external. Azure Moon was the first route for me, and when all was said and done, I came away with a strongly positive impression of the game's narrative that was unmatched by the other routes. Compared to something like Crimson Flower, where Edelgard only defeats those who slither in the dark in the epilogue, Azure Moon is comparatively much more complete on its own terms. It's not an issue really that it doesn't finish the game's lore either, because playing Blue Lines will really motivate you to play through the other routes of the game, and this feeds into the whole replayability aspect of the game. For example, you have the bit where Dimitri is investigating Lord Arundel and learning about his donations that have stopped. Knowing this tidbit before you play the other routes makes the build up to his identity more gradual and satisfying. It's also super cool, I think, that Dimitri couldn't be tutored for several months in Part 2. Whilst a lot of players might hate this from a gameplay perspective, I think it was really powerful for gameplay to inform character state. It led well into his growth as well, which by the way I don't think was rushed at all. I know a lot of people think that Rodrigue's death was the only thing that motivated Dimitri to stop living for the dead, but honestly I think these people miss the subtlety of the execution. His growth is really well done, and there are definitely hints sprinkled beforehand that show Dimitri's current persona hasn't completely consumed his benevolent one. And after Rodrigue's death, Dimitri still hasn't totally come around. Byleth has to give him one more pep talk before he's ready to listen, and Dimitri's voice actor really sells it in a heartfelt and emotionally intelligent moment.
But you seem to have all the answers. So tell me, Professor. Please tell me. How do I silence their desperate pleas? How do I save them? But then who or what should I live for? What I believe in. Rodrigue said the same thing. But is it possible?
Azure Moon is not bereft of issues. The Tragedy of Duska plot ends in a way that's a bit underwhelming, and there's an odd choice in the middle of the story between going to Enbar or Ferdiad that has no impact or relevance. Otherwise, I've hardly got anything to complain about here. Even the ending, which is really understated compared to the other routes, works really well, and it's probably the best ending. Just the many ways that Edelgard's throwing of the dagger back to Dimitri can be interpreted is wonderful. And there's my ranking for all the routes in 3 houses. Did I get it right? How would you rank them? While I think it's fun to rank the different routes, I think the beauty of 3 houses is that they feed into each other. Generally speaking, they each provide a different experience, and come together to form a wonderful game. Putting this video together was an arduous process of writing, editing, and compiling. It really took so much out of me, and so I will be taking a short break from videos just to work on myself for a bit. That said, there's already lots of Three Houses content on this channel, and more to come, so be sure to subscribe and check it out if you're interested. Keep it real, stay safe, and thanks for watching.